All right, so continuing with assignment 7 here. Remember that this whole process started with a sketch. And the sketch I used was based on the scene and my stuff with glasses and a computer and a messy desk. And the important thing in 3 or more shots, you wanted to explore the space and kind of suggest a narrative simply through your use of focus and camera angle. And if you wanted to, lighting as well. But selective focus for sure. So in this first shot, I wanted the foreground to be out of focus and the background to be in focus. So I started with an exposure that I took, and I got this exposure with the foreground out of focus and the background in focus, even the door fairly in focus, but really the focus centering on the computer and that desk, which has that very same sketch on it. The way I did that is using a macro shooting mode, which prioritizes for large opening of the aperture, so a low f-stop. So if you really want to push the depth effects potential of your camera, whether it's a point and shoot or whether it's an SLR, macro mode is a good way to see what those limits are, even on a standard lens. So this is not a fisheye or wide angle lens. This is just a standard lens, but in macro mode, you can get these very strong focal shifts. You can also play with that with your zoom and kind of arrange the shot. Now, this was a challenging subject because it's making something very boring, just a desk and stuff and clutter, trying to make it more engaging. So that you want to think about your composition, you want to think about the way the eye travels through the picture plane. That's why everything's on a tilt. And that's why it feels like you're looking over, it's like a helicopter shot going into the city. You're looking over these foreground kind of mountains getting into the valley here. Now that's my exposure. It has some interesting color to it. But then I used adjustment layers. And first I did a levels adjustment. And then I added a color balance adjustment. And I took out a lot of that yellow from the fluorescence. And then I did a hue saturation adjustment and actually took out a lot of the color. So it looked even more kind of boring and dry so that I can kind of add more attention through my use of focus. Now I did that with adjustment layers, which I did by going to layer and saying new adjustment layer instead of doing direct adjustments to duplicate layers. So that didn't copy over the pixels. Instead it added a filter, and that's why these layers look different, that I can apply to the background exposure. Now the reason I did that is then I can go to my other exposures and I could just select all those layers, all those adjustment layers, and drag them over on top of my other photos. And that's a good way to start if I want standardized processing. So that's how a lot of professional photographers will apply standard adjustments to their exposures. Now what's interesting is then I'll make slightly different decisions on each exposure. So for this one, I played with the hue saturation a little bit more. I really wanted to bring out the green in the glasses. That's kind of spicing up this academic scene. And then in this second one, I didn't take the color down quite so much. But this one's all about the foreground being in focus, hinting at the glasses, just a part of the glasses on the grade book being in focus, background being way out of focus. And then my final one, really showing the 3 layers of depth. Now one of your multiple shots here has to showcase 3 layers of depth. And I do it in the end to be kind of the most dramatic, even though I changed from my sketch here, which is a landscape format, to the portrait format. That was the best exposure I got. I want to have the foreground out of focus, the midground in focus, and the background out of focus. And that's the only way you can get this illusion of 3 distinct layers of depth. All right. So once I added all my adjustment layers and played around with them so I was happy with them, then I saved them as PSDs so I can go back and play with their adjustments. But once I was happy with them, I then saved them and flattened them as TIFF files. Now, TIFF files we've used before in our projects to kind of merge things together so we can process them overall. Here I save them as TIFFs so that they're locked in with all of those layer adjustments. Because if I pull them without their layer adjustments, then I would lose their whole image. So now I have flattened individual finished photographs. And basically this is the way I would make something print ready. I would apply all the adjustments and then I would flatten them and save them as a TIFF. That's called an archive format because it saves space but you don't lose any quality. And then this one's ready to print. So if I go to a computer with a printer, I could arrange this to fit within my my printable area, and I can make it a size that would fit. So maybe make it 10 inches tall by 6.6 inches wide, or maybe to fit within an 8x10 mat, I make it 9 by 6, which is the format of my camera. And then it would print at a resolution of 430 pixels per inch, which is more than we need, but not so obscene that I have to shrink it. Anywhere between 350 pixels per inch and 500 pixels per inch is fine for us. Anything above 240 pixels per inch is acceptable and it will look pretty good. Anything less than 240 pixels per inch, you will notice it in the printing, that it doesn't look as good as it can. But the problem is, I don't want to print each of these individually, though you can, and that would work for this assignment. I want to compose them on a larger format. So I'm going to say cancel, and then I'm going to go back to my sketch, and I'm going to sketch again, looking at all of my TIFFs. So what I'm going to do now is close these PSDs. I don't need them anymore. They're already saved. If I want to go back and alter my my processing, now what I'm going to do is just float and arrange all of these different TIFFs on different windows. I'm going to float them all in separate windows. I don't need this PSD open. And what I'm going to do is just play with their arrangement and kind of figure out, okay, how do I want them to fit together on a page, kind of like a comic book. And so I have them in sequence. When I sketched them, I was thinking 1, 2, 3. And so I could do that. I could make them on a vertical format, but that will be tricky because they're not all landscape photos. I can shrink them. I don't have to have them all the same size. This is probably the least exciting one. I can even overlap them. So what's the best way to kind of tell the story? So I kind of like this progression. And then maybe I just overlap that one with this one a little bit. And maybe that will kind of tell the story. So what I'm doing now is I'm just playing. And maybe this one's a little bit smaller, not that much smaller. This one's a little bit bigger, maybe not that much bigger, but I'm getting a sense of how it works. So it feels like it builds to this moment. All right, so how am I going to make that work? Well, I could sketch that out in my sketchbook to remember it, or because I kind of worked it out here, I can just do Command-Shift-4 like we did before with our FaceTime, and I can make a screen grab of it, and that just shows me a little sketch here in preview of how they might be arranged. That's optional, but it's good to proceed now with a plan for how they should go together. So now I have this sketch. Now I want to see what's the best way to build this. And because there's not one that's centered, it almost doesn't matter which one I choose to build from, but I'm going to use the second one here. I'm going to make a duplicate of it, and it's just like what we've done before with other projects, but now it's more up to you how you format it. I'm going to fill the back, well, I'm not going to do that yet, but I'm going to grow the canvas, the paper around this, So I go to canvas size, and I'm going to make it much, much bigger. So let's try, it's going to be portrait format. So I'm going to make it 30 inches wide by 40 inches tall, growing from the center with white. And I like to do that because it's one of the ways I know that it's pure white. Okay, now I'm going to take this background layer and I'm going to fill that with white so that that photo is no longer in the background. So now I just have a space to arrange my photos. Okay, now I can bring this photo in. And I want it kind of over here. And I can bring this photo in. Now this is the maximum that they should be. So because I made my space so much bigger than what I can print, I should only shrink from here. I shouldn't grow. So if I look at my sketch, what I planned out, come on, open up. There it is. Wait, where is it? Here it is. All right. So if I look at my sketch, I see that this is the largest one. So I need to shrink these two, right? So first I'm going to take this layer. I'm going to go ahead and turn on auto select. So I can just click it. And I'm going to hit Command T and hold down Shift so it doesn't distort. And I'm going to shrink it. You're also allowed to crop. So if I didn't want quite so much of it, I could cut off certain parts, and I'll show you how I would do that. So let's say I wanted this to not be the full rectangle, but instead just be this portion. Well, then I always make duplicates, but then I would just take the rectangular marquee, cut it off at some point, and then just hit delete. And you have automatic cropping. And then it's this photo. And I want this a little bit smaller at the top. And then I decide, well, do I want that cropping? Does that help? Or does it better to have it full and then maybe push this one behind it? Right. So you're playing with your kind of storytelling potential. And I'm going to keep it kind of clean, I think. So I kind of like this. That's my story. But now I need to crop around it. That's why I gave myself more space than I need. And arrange it into a composition. And again, the largest easy composition for us is 11 by 14. But we can even go to 12 by 18 if we get the right mats, because our printer can go all the way up to 13 by 19. So if I liked this arrangement, pay attention to the spacing between, because each time you jump over a gutter or a border, it's like passing time. And I might even turn on my grid and count. So that's 1, 2.5, and that's more like 2. And a tiny bit. So I might bring this one just out a little bit so that space is more similar. These are kind of the things you can consider. All right, now if I'm happy with that, I could play the same games that I played with my Cubist project to finish it off entirely. What I do is I turn off that background white, and I simply say Layer Merge Visible. And I delete the layers that aren't showing. And I save this now as my assignment. So Carl Frye Assignment 7 combined with all those different depth shots in one as a TIFF to the desktop. As an LZW TIFF. And then I can run actions on it as well and see if that brings up anything. And I'll just go over that process again in the next demo. But it's very important to have it all as one layer at that point. All right.